Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to eWeek 2020. We're now on day 4 of our week of highly interactive and engaging events, and we're really thrilled to have you all joining us here tonight. This is our for-profit, for-good session, and I hope some of you have been able to join some of the earlier sessions, but this is, I'm sure, one that is of huge interest to a lot of participants. Just a little bit about us at Farrers before we start. At Farrers, our focus is on acting for private businesses, family businesses, entrepreneurs and investors. This week is therefore a really important and key part of our year. If you've not done so already, please do take a look at our microsite, which is at www.entrepreneursweek.co.uk, and we'll pop that into the chat box. And then you can see a little bit more about how we work with entrepreneurs and investors throughout the year. We'd also love it if you could join the conversation about the week in social media. You can do this by using the hashtag EW2020 and tagging at Farraco on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram. And if you haven't done so already, please do sign up for our final session of the week, which is an hour of cocktails and networking, and with some really fantastic prizes donated by some of our clients, and that's tomorrow evening. So you will be able to find details of that in the microsite. Some final bits of housekeeping. Even though we are virtual, there are still some bits and pieces. So if you would like to submit any questions to the panelists, please feel free to do so using the Q&A box. Of course, if you want to just share some general comments and thoughts rather than questions, then do pop those into the chat box as well at the bottom of your screen. We should also let you know that this session is going to be recorded so we can share it with our clients, and a recording of all of our sessions from this whole of this week will be available on our microsite, as well as the list of key takeaways from our sessions. We're here to help, so after all these sessions, if you have any questions, do get in touch. The contact details are on the microsite again. And a final request, we have been running a survey across this week with a poll of questions. Again, we will pop that in the chat box. It shouldn't take more than 60 seconds, but we're really interested in your views around these questions that are pertinent to entrepreneurs today. And so we'd be really grateful for your participation in the survey. So moving on to the session itself. So as I said, this session is called For Profit, For Good, and we are looking at the importance of social responsibility for businesses. We'll consider how businesses can be more socially responsible and why it's important. What do I actually mean by for profit, for good? Well, for us, this concept encapsulates a number of broad concepts and themes around ESG, environmental, social and governance, social impact or positive impact, so making positive impact on society, sustainability, corporate social responsibility, but really taking these ideas and focusing on these themes and how these themes and ideas are relevant in a for-profit context. So for-profit companies which are trying to do things in a better way. Historically, I'm sure many of you will agree that these themes were often seen as marginal or marginal consideration for businesses, maybe often relegated to an afterthought or a checklist or a nice to have for businesses, or maybe philanthropic giving for investors. But our view is that things are changing. We are seeing companies across all sectors, not just those which themselves are sort of impact business or in the green economy, but all sectors putting more emphasis on being socially responsible, and perhaps not seeing this as just a cost or a gesture around philanthropy, but rather seeing some intrinsic value in doing so. And what I want to examine today is whether businesses really are seeing some value in this. And if so, how can businesses and how can each of you take steps on your own journey to become more socially responsible? And to help us with those questions, we have a really expert panel here today with us to help us navigate some of these issues and these questions. So we're really thankful and grateful to our panelists for joining us. We have Giles Gibbons, who is the founder and CEO of Good Business, which is a strategy sustainability consultant. We have James Lawson from Tribe Capital, founder of Tribe Capital Partners, the first dedicated impact wealth manager in the UK. We have Kate Sandel from B Labs, whose purpose is to transform the global economy to benefit all people, communities, and the planet. One of the ways it does this is by certifying B Corps. And Nigel Mapp, who is founder and CEO of Mapp, a property management services company, which is well on its way on its own journey to becoming more socially responsible. So thank you, each of you, for joining us. I'd like to start by asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves a little bit more and maybe explain how the theme of for profit for good is relevant to what each of them does. So Kate, can I ask you just to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Mari, and thanks for having me. It's such a good discussion, a very relevant discussion to be having. So I'm the Director of Programmes and Engagement at B Lab UK, which is the not-for-profit behind the B Corporation movement. And as you kind of described a little bit there, we're kind of, I'd say we're three things. So one, we're a certification of good, responsible, ethical businesses. Tribe are actually a certified B Corp, which is great. But also we're a community of like-minded organizations who want to learn from each other, improve, partner, network. And then we're a movement. So we've got big, bold aims of trying to reinvent capitalism and shift away from shareholder primacy to stakeholder capitalism, essentially. So we're trying to do that in lots of different ways. One is by building a community, and we've got 3,500 businesses globally from 75 countries, combined revenues of 80 billion in our community, from businesses like Lombard Odier to Patagonia or The Guardian or The Body Shop, who have all certified. And they all feed a really big piece into kind of change the way that business operates. But also we're changing legislation. So we've changed legislation in 35 states across the US, and in Ecuador, Italy, Colombia, British Columbia and Canada. And we've got some big ambitions for the UK as well. But I'll stop there.
Fantastic, thanks, Kate. Giles, if you would also give us a brief introduction. You're on mute, Giles, sorry.
Sorry, hello. That's the age-old problem, isn't it? We're all going to be doing, that's going to go into the dictionary, isn't it, for 2020. Yeah, so I founded Good Business in 1996. When much of this was, as you say, very much on the side of businesses, and it really has been amazing to watch the sort of the evolution of sustainability, ESG, whatever you want to call it. But actually, I would start by saying that the reason why this is interesting to most businesses is because people see the society that they're in. They see the planet and they see the inequality, and they think that it's not good enough, and people want to see change in their businesses. They're just not sure how. And I think that what we've been able to do over the last 25 years is help organizations understand the impacts that they have and help them manage it better, in order that not only do they do it in a better way, as you say, but that they focus their attention on material issues that mean that when they then deliver that through their products and services, they can differentiate themselves from their competitors and therefore gain a benefit from it. And therefore, the concept of good business is an important one, that this is not doing good for the sake of it. This is doing good because it makes sense for the organization. And that's what we did in 1996, and we're still doing it today.
Fantastic, and absolutely ties in with what our concept of for profit for good is. James, if you could tell us a little bit about Tribe.
Sure, and thanks for having us. So Tribe, first and foremost, is a very proud B Corp, and we're a business, we're a wealth manager. We call ourselves an impact wealth manager, which broadly means we're building portfolios for people, maybe charities or families or corporates, often families, where we are aligning the individuals or the corporates' financial requirements with their values, the way they see the world, and their impact, the change they want to make in the world. And currently the only people doing this in the UK, and whilst we call ourselves impact wealth managers, I think in 5 or 10 years' time, all assets are going to be run this way. And we can talk about that a bit later on. But yeah, so Tribe Impact Wealth Management, based in the UK, now running for 3 or 4 years.
Fantastic, thanks, James. And Nigel, if you would tell us a little bit about what you're doing at MAP.
Yeah, well, I often say I've got 3 jobs actually, and MAP is why I'm here, and we'll talk a little bit about obviously what we get up to. But I think the interesting thing about MAP is that whilst we've got a relatively small business, I mean, we employ 400 people and, turn over 30 million. Actually, our footprint is huge because of the properties we manage. So we manage 13 billion pounds worth of real estate in the UK. We reckon that over 120,000 people a day usually work in those buildings. And millions of people come through the doors every day because we manage shopping centres and big office buildings and everything else. So, we have a disproportionate impact, or can have a disproportionate impact on what we do. So that's the day-to-day job. I'm also chair of the trustees and have been involved for 15 years with a charity called Resurgo, whose focus is social transformation and does all sorts of things, probably best known for its SPEAR course, which works with 16 to 24-year-olds to get them to full-time education, training and work, and does other stuff, social ventures, consulting, a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's reasonably good thing to be in, sustainable. The thing that I'm probably not sustainable about is the third job. I'm the father to 5 children. So anyone who has 5 children these days apparently isn't that sustainable. So I probably fail on that one. And if you want me to leave the panel now, I will.
Thank you, Nigel. That's great, and we'll let you off that last one.
Thank you. I'll be relieved to hear that.
And so, as you can all see, we do have a panel of experts who absolutely will help us on this journey. And so I suppose the first question I want to explore with each of you is there really change? And if so, what's driving it? Because I suppose as a lawyer, from where I'm sitting, we do see change because we see a whole host of regulations coming in. There's constantly enhanced corporate governance, reporting requirements. You've got modern slavery reporting, gender pay gap, increased environmental reporting. So is this really about compliance, or do you believe that actually there is a fundamental shift happening? And if so, what's driving that? Giles, why do clients come to you? What are they? What are you seeing in that regard?
I think there is change absolutely happening. I think that regulation is a part of that, but actually, I think that what was happening pre-coronavirus, and it seems almost too long ago to even think about, but what was so interesting about January 2020 was it felt like there was a confluence of factors where everyone was pointing in a very sort of positive direction, focused on change, be it investors, businesses, consumers, brands, institutions. There was a real sense of a dynamic going on. And that could be put down to lots of things. I think, 10 years until the SDGs were going to be realized. Lots of factors that were out there that I think were driving that. But it really felt that every part of the sort of sector was pointing in the same direction, not at the same velocity, but the same direction. And I think we haven't seen that for 25 years. So I think we were incredibly excited at the beginning of this year that this was really a decade of transformation. And I still hope it will be. Obviously we need to understand that things have been unbelievably changed in the last 6 months, but I'm still hopeful that transformation will come. Regulation is important, but we really need people to go way beyond that if we're going to achieve the things that we want to.
Great. And Kate, would you say that aligns with what you're seeing as well, and why businesses are coming to you to think about B Corp certification?
Yeah, absolutely. I think change is coming from all over, as Giles said. It's incredible to see, and I think actually businesses are driving that change too. So you've got something like the Business Roundtable, which happened last year, and they redesigned the purpose of the corporation. This is the top 200 CEOs in the US saying businesses have to work for more than shareholder returns, which is completely shocking coming from the US. It's a real step change. So we've got things like that. You've got the FT saying capitalism, it's time for a reset last year. So the largest financial newspaper in the world calling it out. So there's lots of different change happening. And I think then you've got supply chain. So you've either got kind of the climate crisis and the risks that are involved in supply chains and being able to steward them and de-risking that. Or you've got big businesses turning around to their supply chains and saying you need to meet certain conditions. So you had, I think it was this week, IKEA, Unilever and BT came together to spearhead a net zero within their supply chains, which is impressive. So there's all of that that's happening, but I think you've also got kind of like return on investments, which I'm sure James will talk to, but there's a huge shift. There's the largest transfer of wealth from millennials happening who want to align with their values when it comes to investing. And you've got BlackRock and everyone else looking at their returns in a COVID world, saying that they've outsurpassed the other funds that they had. So wherever you look, we see this change happening. And that's not even touching on retention and recruitment and getting the best people who want to work for you because they want to align their values with the company that they work for. So yeah, multiple different areas.
Fantastic. And Nigel, I mean, what drove you to look at MAP, and you know, was it the same sort of reasons that we've just heard from Giles and Kate?
Well, I think there's two things going on. I think one is your own personal view on where you want to be as a business, and so there's a whole group of people that do want to see the change that we've been talking about, and I'm one of them. And then yes, you have to, when you're working with clients, and you know, we act for probably 25 or 30 different clients, respond to them, and we've got everybody from way over where we sit all the way over to those who just don't get it or don't understand it. So trying to position yourself and lead them as well is interesting. So I think it's passion, those that are passionate about it, want to see change, and those that are having a boot up the bottom from the compliance end, who are saying, my gosh, we really do have to change. I mean, I had a conversation this week with a potential client who's got 500 million quid worth of real estate in the UK, and they are going to change who they use to look after their property and to work with primarily on sustainability, because they are finding it difficult to access new capital. Because the new capital is saying, we're just looking at your points and what you're doing on your whole ESG stuff, and it's not good enough. So the drivers are coming from everywhere.
Yep.
Yeah, including, it sounds like, from your clients now as well. And James, Nigel mentioned passion and compliance. Are you going to tell me it's also money as well?
Well, so whilst I agree with Giles in the fact that that this is really exciting in terms of time, I sit in an industry, in investment management broadly, who have been, I think, the laggards in this. Broadly, we've got people on one side running great businesses, solving really interesting challenges to make the planet more livable and society more equitable. And on the other hand, you've got individuals or institutions who have the capital who want to invest in those businesses. In the middle, we've got investment management, and historically, investment management understands one dimension. It understands up and down. And so it cannot compute how to get these two things to talk together. Yet if you look within investment management, you have these interesting things that have always been happening, one of which is philanthropy, where people have capital, give it away, but get an enormous amount of engagement, excitement, and enthusiasm once they've imbued that capital with values they've got. You've also got, you mentioned passion. I mean, people have art on the walls. They buy art because it may go up in value, so there might be a financial return. But more importantly, they buy art because there is some kind of emotional return. And yet nobody's really, or nobody had really figured out that those sorts of touchy-feely things are really important in investment. And what's great is that this is now starting to happen. We're now starting to be able to pull these plugs together investment management has got a bit better at realizing that fundamentally we're trying to connect human beings, and human beings fundamentally are social beings. We like telling and hearing stories. And so how can investment management and wealth management help create those stories for both the wealth holders and for those seeking capital? So we are getting there. But as I say, investment management, I think, has been probably a laggard to this and been an inhibitor to some of these things rather than a promoter, which is a massive shame, but I think is now changing. I do share the optimism with the rest of the panel on that.
So a huge amount of optimism, which is great, and it genuinely, I agree, it genuinely does feel like the world is changing, but I'm also conscious that there will be businesses out there that are incredibly profitable, incredibly successful today, and possibly even in the industries you're talking about, James. Yes, there is this future where maybe every investment manager will be thinking a lot more about this, but potentially today they're not quite there yet. And I just wonder, what would you say to those people listening right now who aren't yet convinced, and why should they be, why is it important that they should be considering being more responsible? We've heard a few of the reasons, but Kate, do you want to tell us a little bit about your sales pitch when you are speaking to some of these businesses?
Yeah, thank you. Gosh, my sales pitch, we haven't been doing that in a while, which is a real sign, actually, I think. So we're back up to levels pre-COVID of people logging on to use our assessment. So between 100 and 110 businesses a week who are looking to understand their business a little bit better by using our free tool. But I think, I think I mentioned some of them before. I think the recruitment and the retention, I think COVID has actually given everyone a bit of a wake-up call how important their employees are, right? How their safety is, how their mental health is, their well-being, and just their health. So the real recognition that actually having really great people on your team who are adaptable, who are resilient, who are able to change is really key. And actually they want to work for companies that they understand, that they believe in. And that's a really big driver. And we hear that feedback from a lot of B Corps who've been hiring, who say it was mentioned in the interview, or they're only applying for B Corps, or even we had one person, a director in a large advertising firm that's a B Corp, come forward and say, actually, I want to tender my resignation, but the only thing that will stop me from doing it is getting more involved in B Corp, which was really brilliant and great to hear. But there's lots of different stories around that. And I think people are so essential to that story. But then you've got just understanding, I totally agree with Nigel on the kind of the emotional journey, the passion, the aligning with your own values as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and recognizing actually you want to be proud of the business that it does, and also to be able to talk to your friends and your family about what you've done, to say that you've left the world in a better place, which is fundamental, I think. And when you want to create change, and we're thinking about tangible steps, actually that buy-in has to come from the top, but also from the bottom, from people who are on the ground, who are doing the work. They need to understand why you're deciding to create that change. So it's lots of different reasons, I think. One other thing is just on understanding your business better. So if you're measuring your water, if you're measuring your electricity, if you're measuring your energy use, and you're transferring it towards renewable energy, you're going to be in a way better state, one, from knowing your business, but then for trying to reduce that impact and reduce your costs. So there's an operational saving often that's implied there as well as the saving that potentially comes with keeping employees for longer or attracting the better talent. Lots of different ways of engaging with it. And I think wherever you look within a business, there are important structures to be had. Our assessment is around 5 different areas. So governance, workers, employees, environment, consumers, customers, and community. So wherever you look, we see that there's opportunity for businesses to improve, get better, and also benefit from looking at this stuff.
But it does sound like from all of your responses, passion is a word that keeps coming up, and it has to be sort of core to your principles. I mean, is any of this possible if certainly at board level there isn't that level of passion or buy-in? Giles, have when you're advising, does it tend to have to be at board level, or do you can you find other ways of convincing the top of the business?
Well, you need the decision makers to want to agree to whatever the business needs to do it. So they are pretty fundamental to it. I think passion isn't a word that I would normally associate with non-executive directors. And I think that one of the interesting developments would be getting a broader, more diverse group of non-exec directors that, you know, are really open to some of these issues, rather than being too financially focused in terms of they believe their role is, from a governance perspective, is more on the financial. I think it should be much broader than that. But passion is always helpful. You're never going to get a whole group of people having it. You're never going to get a whole group of people agreeing with that passion. But I do think that you need leaders, and then you need people to support those leaders in going in a particular direction. And so, you know, we see, you know, coalescing around, you know, ideas, plans, business cases that then the rest of the business gets behind and goes for. It is really you know, the best way of moving dynamically in a direction. If that's the CEO, so much the better. But actually, it can come from other senior parts of the business. I was talking to a very large telecommunications company this morning, and the head of sustainability / corporate affairs said to me, "I've been bashing my head against a brick wall, but the head of operations has just had a Damascene moment that electric cars are the future because his mate bought one, and now he wants to move faster than any other to move the whole fleet to electric cars, and the CEO thinks it's a good idea." So it's like moments like that where you could unlock an individual, and then you support them with the information and the business case that they need in order to get it through.
And then actually that you sort of started to answer one of the questions I was going to put to you, which is, you know, how do you bring people along with you on your journey if they are skeptics? But I mean, Nigel, have you found that you've had to really work on convincing people in your business, or has there been buy-in throughout?
I think you do have to work at it, because you've just got to communicate and lead on it. But people very quickly get it. That's my experience. You know, the whole team have got it, and they actually get really excited about it because they all feel this stuff. They're all seeing it going on. They might struggle to articulate or work out how they can help. But as soon as you set out the vision and practical ways of how they might support you and help you in that journey, you've got the buy-in straight away. You'll always have some skeptics, you know, on the margins, you know, throwing the odd bottle in. That's to be expected. Actually, that's quite healthy. You know, to have people challenging what you're doing is really healthy. So yeah, but you do have to lead on it. You can't go on mute and just assume that everyone's just going to, you know, understand what you're doing through telepathy or something. You know, it's just not going to happen. You've got to lead on the way that you lead, you know, on most things in a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting what you say about, you know, it is healthy to have people who are challenging it, because, you know, obviously a huge part of good governance is making sure you do have that diversity of opinion and thought in your business. So it probably shows you're doing the right thing if you are being challenged. So that's really interesting. So I'm convinced, and I hope our participants today are feeling convinced that, you know, there really is value here. It really matters for a range of reasons, but, you know, there is clearly a shift happening, and for a wealth of reasons, there is a reason to do that. So if a business is listening in today and is about to start that journey, what would you say is the best place to start if they know it's an issue, the board wants to address it, but really isn't sure about where it can start? Kate, how would you advise a business coming to you?
Yeah, I think I've got two conflicting answers to this, because one, I think kind of adding on to what Nigel was saying, which is meet people where they are, get people to get the buy-in from their angle, from their perspective, and understand the challenges that they have to the changes that you might want to make. And small steps, you know, you can't do everything at once, so to pick and choose your battles. But on the flip side, I think COVID has chosen us that we can make dramatic changes to businesses really fast. So I think there's a both and here, and there's obviously different approaches for different businesses and what they're trying to achieve. But actually we are in a climate crisis. We do need to all change. We do need to make net zero commitments, and whether they're 2030, 2040 or 2050, they need to happen, and we need to often fundamentally change the business model of businesses and make really big, bold changes. So there's different ways of approaches, and it depends on the leadership that you have in the organization to bring the organization with you. I probably should say use our assessment tool. So it's free for anyone to use. It's called the B Impact Assessment. We've got, I don't know, 100,000 users worldwide. It's intentionally free. There's a reason why we're a not-for-profit. We just want to encourage businesses to understand their business impact better. So as I said earlier, it's across all the different areas of your business. Go through that, have a flick, ask yourself some questions. It is long, so warning, you might want to, I don't know, a drink as you go to settle down into it. But it's a really great way just to ask yourself questions that you might not have asked before, and just to get a little bit more insight into the way that you're doing it. So they would be kind of, top tips. And also, sorry, one other thing is, if you're willing to be bold, make public commitments, hold yourself accountable, let your staff hold you accountable to the changes that you need to make, whether they're net zero, whether about diversity and inclusion, publish them, be transparent. And if you don't meet them, that's also fine. I think anyone who's making a net zero commitment now, who says they know exactly how they're going to get there, and it's not just by offsetting, is probably lying. We're all walking into the wild here, and we all need to be able to be happy with the fact that we don't have all the answers. And be willing to say, do you know what, actually we made a mistake or we did something wrong. And there's some great examples of businesses who have a lot more respect from their employees and from their customers as a result of doing that. Just one example is Innocent, who wrote a report recently, and they were just talking about a decision they made around air freight. And I think on one occasion they had to air freight a piece of fruit, and they were open about it, because that's what happened. And if you understand the context, people are going to be able to understand the decision and the reason why you did it.
Great. So be bold, do some look at your business, and then be transparent, I think are some great tips there. Giles, is there anything else you'd add to that?
Well, I'd absolutely advocate using Kate's assessment tool. We've done it. It always throws up really interesting ways of looking at your business, and so I think a generic tool like that is a really sort of useful start point. I suppose with my sort of good business hat on, what we do is a very tailor-made process of that, where we're really trying to help the business look at the really material issues for their business, the type of business they are, the size, the supply chain, etc., that we can really help them dig into their unique impacts, positive and negative. In a sense, too many businesses have responded to society by doing things that aren't that important to the impacts that they're having as a business. So first and foremost, really try and understand what those impacts are of your business, and then look at what you can do to dramatically change those or evolve them, depending on how important they are. And our particular point at Good Business is focus in on your material issues that are important then to your customers and your consumers, in order that by making those changes, you use what you're doing and the progressiveness that you're creating to be able to tell a story about you to your people and to your consumers that will differentiate you and motivate them in their mind and inspire them. And that's where you can derive the business benefit from those changes, the capital that's needed in order to make those changes. So if you make it a circular model, you can be more and more ambitious over time. If it's just linear, it's much more difficult to keeping on, as Kate says, to try and be more and more ambitious with the changes that you're trying to make.
Yeah, no, that will make sense. And James, I mean, is there anything that you can share about the sort of diligence you do on businesses when you're investing in them, that might also help them when they're starting out on their journey, and might also help them in shaping their early steps to changing?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, and by design, it's very similar to what we've been talking about here, where we have an investment philosophy that is, we want to invest in well-run businesses solving big problems. It's not a particularly complicated investment philosophy. How you find those well-run businesses and how you determine what the important problems is the challenging bit. And when we're looking at investments, obviously we're looking at the financial statements, but actually that's less important than what the work our impact team do. So every investment we make has to be approved by both the investment and impact teams. On the impact side, we're looking, we reference the Sustainable Development Goals, but we have our own framework, which again, unsurprisingly, uses language that we've already heard today. So we're looking at additional, material, and intentional businesses. Additional, as in, are they solving for a problem that would have been solved anyway without them? Are they actually additive to that process? Material is, how significant are they? And how significant is what they're doing to solving this problem? And intentional, did they mean to do this? Or did they just accidentally ended up creating a great solution to a big problem? And you know, Giles has already talked about that intentionality and materiality. Where us as allocators of capital, we're not traders, we're investors, which means we're thinking about what are the businesses of tomorrow. And by tomorrow, I mean the next 10, 20 years. I can't tell you what the stock markets are going to do over the next few hours. I'm not interested in what they're doing in the next few hours. I want to know what are the future fit businesses. And those are well-run businesses, not just well-run business, but I think well-run businesses solving big problems like education, housing, financial inclusion, the environment, resource efficiency, those sorts of things. And as I say, it is by design very similar to the sorts of things that the rest of the panelists, and especially Kate and the B Lab, are talking about. Those are, we think, well-run businesses.
So it's the next step for these businesses looking at themselves is, again, going back to that idea of looking at yourself, doing due diligence on yourself, and then, you know, make sure that you are doing all those things that make you into a good business. Nigel, does all of this sound familiar in the way you're approaching your journey and the experiences you've had?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's going to sound like an advert for B Corp, but when we started looking at all this, you know, we had all the ideas, and we had actually quite a lot of knowledge inside our business because of the real estate we manage. But I think we quickly realized that we needed a framework. We needed something to work towards that wasn't just focused on a particular element of what we did. You know, we were very proud early on of what we were doing in terms of not sending stuff to landfill. But, you know, that was a very small part of what we did. Yeah, it was great, we should celebrate it. But when you start to look at, you know, everything that you do, you realize that actually, you know, you can't do it by yourself. And you know, we don't go for gongs just for going for gong's sake. But actually, it was really important that we understood the breadth of what we were looking at and trying to achieve. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you need to get some help. I don't think you can, if you're a startup, or even if you're a reasonably mature mid-sized business, it's unlikely you're going to have the capabilities inside. So, you know, I don't know Giles's business, but, you know, Giles's business, we've gone to a company called Shaw Mountain, John Featherby. You need some help. You need some help to point you in the right direction. If that's all they do, you definitely need that, or to go and get it, I think, as Giles said, you know, at board level. I think the third thing I'd say, you've got to measure yourself. You've got to measure what you're doing. There's no point in having these great ambitions, setting out a great big stall, doing some stuff, and then not measuring yourself and working out actually whether you're having the impact that you want to have. And the fourth thing, which I think is for us, and it won't be for every business, is look at the overall supply chain. So as I said, you know, we're a mid-sized business, but our footprint is huge because of the real estate portfolio that we run, the amount of waste that we work with, the amount of electricity we consume across that real estate portfolio, the amount of people that we touch each day in the shopping centres and the office buildings that we manage, the impact we can have on them and their well-being is huge. I mean, you look at the COVID at the moment, and just trying to get people back into some of the shopping centres we manage, and the impact we can have on them, and the impact we can have on town centres, and the feeling of well-being in the town centres. So we've got a big footprint with a huge supply chain. Look at your supply chain as well. Who are you working with? Have they signed up to the same values that you have? Are you all working together? Because if you're pushing something and you're constantly being pulled back by the supply chain, who don't give a hoof about what they pay their people, or how they train their people, or reward their people, or look after their people, then you're constantly going to feel that you're being pulled back.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that, and that leads me nicely on to the next question, actually, because I think authenticity is a really important part to all of this, and we've talked about passion, but we haven't yet talked about authenticity, and I suppose that needs to come at all levels of your business, supply chain, and within yourselves as well. And I wonder, how do companies achieve that authenticity, and what are the challenges around greenwashing that are out there? Because it is a buzzword at the moment to talk about your own sustainable goals and that you are trying to be more socially responsible. But how can you ensure that you are being authentic to those aims? And I suspect some of this will come back to the ideas we've already talked about, so transparency and measuring that. But are there any sort of additional thoughts you have, Kate, in helping businesses go beyond just sort of greenwashing, but actually being authentic here?
Yeah, and I'm sure Giles has lots to add, working with lots of different businesses over the years on purpose statements and things like that. But one of the things that we say when businesses certify is, how does the certification, does B Corp help you explain who you are, your values that exist within you? So, how does that, the reason you exist, why were you created, who you are as a business, how does that help explain it? And I think that's really important to kind of make it personal to the business and to the journey. But you're wrong, but it's the kind of the greenwashing thing is interesting. To certify as a B Corp, it's pretty hard. You go through quite a rigorous process. It definitely requires an investment of time and resource, and then there's a cost to certify, which is relatively minor. And actually, if you're willing to go through that, to do that, then actually you're meeting the requirements, because the process we have a lot of faith in to be able to get through that. And I say there's kind of three different reasons broadly why people certify: wanting a certification, wanting to be part of the community, or believing that capitalism needs to change. And actually, a lot of businesses join because they want that stamp of approval. So that could be seen as, to some extent, the greenwashing. They want to be able to have that logo and wear it proudly, because they think that's going to help them in marketing or whatever it is. But actually, it's our mission to get them to the fact that actually capitalism needs to change, and it doesn't matter. So if you're a B Corp and your intentions are there, you're willing to certify, you're willing to go through the process and hold yourself accountable and be transparent, then you can't be greenwashing to some extent. But your intentions might shift over time. But I think there's different things for different people, and we're fortunate in the B Corp community are doing really great things, and actually the businesses who are less likely, that we think are less likely to become B Corps, are the most interesting for us at the moment. So they're the ones who might have to work a little bit harder with that intentionality and the authenticity that they bring to it. But we think the process will get through anyone who's just doing it for a quick fix.
Yeah, absolutely. Giles, any further thoughts?
Yes, I mean, I think this is a really important point to focus in on, because and I say this as someone who's been in this sector, the sustainability sector, for 25 years. I think a lot of the things that we have helped companies do in that period have actually stopped change rather than accelerated it. The management of sustainability can in itself take a huge amount of time up in an organization, so that they almost forget to change. And I think we've got to be really careful that it's easy to talk and it's much more difficult to deliver. And yes, we need organizations to set out publicly where they want to go and what they're going to do. But critically, we need them to continue to tell us how they are getting there, in order that change is the denominator of success, not talking about it. And I unfortunately, in the last 20 years, there has been too much talk, and that has reduced the pressure in some areas on companies to change, because, oh, look, they're taking it seriously, they're doing something about it. And then, a few years later, you realize actually the change that they were talking about just hasn't come through in the way in which people were discussing, particularly after the last recession. I mean, 2007 and 8, we were doing a huge amount of work around the environment, and the financial crash happened. Every single one of those programs was put on hold, or sort of mothballed. And it really took until 2015 for a lot of those to come back, where there was sort of pressure and, to bring it back, and there was funds there to do it. And I think we need to be really careful, particularly now and with COVID, that we don't allow the sort of pressure and the determination to continue to change, to keep going. And it's really great to see organizations, as I think Kate was saying earlier, still coming out with net zero commitments, for example, around environment during this period. It's like we can't stop. There's no less carbon in the atmosphere. Unfortunately, we need companies to continue to be thinking about this, to moving forward, and even though we've got all these other issues going on. So, we've got to focus on the change and not the words.
That's really interesting. I mean, fascinating that you say that actually saying that you're going to do something about sustainability actually sometimes stops change. And I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but I certainly can see how that can happen. And that takes me back to...
Sorry, I'll give you one example. We worked with a high street bank. We still work with them. And their sustainability team, it took them 9 months of the year of 12 to effectively write the report. Because it's incredibly complicated business. So, gathering all the data from all the different points and then bringing it together and then, presenting it to the outside world. And they only had 3 months of the year to sort of try and create the change that was needed for the next one. It's like you're spending too much of your time in the process of sustainability and not looking at how the business needs to change. And I think that has got a lot better. But I can tell you, enormous amounts of effort is sometimes put into bits that are not actually creating the change.
And so it sounds like we're back to the idea of, having something that's measurable, having it out there so you can be held to account. And maybe another tip here is to set long-term goals. You don't spend 9 months on a strategy for the year and then have 3 months to deliver it. But sometimes these things are difficult. They will take time. You really do need to spend time assessing your business and setting realistic goals, but goals that you could be held accountable to. So maybe that's something for businesses to think about. And
just jump in there, Maury, sorry, just to add on that, and I think is a really important point, that this shouldn't sit within one team. This isn't one person's responsibility. This is a responsibility of the business. And so those goals, those measurements, they rely with the head of operations, with HR, with the legal team, with the CEO, with the sales team, with the product innovation team. Everyone needs to be involved when you're trying to change a business and you're trying to understand it a little bit better. And that distributed responsibility to achieving those goals is really key as well. So, in my mind, in a really great world, we wouldn't need sustainability professionals because it's integral to everyone's deliverables. It's part of their goals. It's part of what they're trying to achieve. So putting that responsibility on one person is too much, or a team is too much, especially with a large organization.
James, you were going to...
Can I add to that? Because a good way of working out if you've got a problem is to Kate's question, maybe to Giles's question, is to ask, where does the moral compass sit in the business? And that seems an odd question to ask, right? But as listening to this, my career started off in financial services in banking, and very clearly the moral compass of the bank was the legal and compliance department, which, if that isn't a sign for a terrible broken system, I don't know what is. I ran a couple of businesses beforehand, and there I was the moral compass. And I know that because people would knock on my door and go, James, I think you're the moral compass, which again, I think is a bad situation to be in. I think the moral compass should be distributed, as Kate was talking about. So if you're in your businesses now and you're saying, gosh, where does the moral compass sit within this business? And they go, well, it's, so-and-so. I think that's the wrong answer. It's a dangerous answer. You should know the moral compass sits within every single individual in your business, because that's when you're going to make change happen. That's when you've got a well-run business, and that's when things get really exciting.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. And Nigel, would you say you are the moral compass, or would you say it's distributed in your business?
No, it is distributed pretty widely. And we're very, very clear that, if over a period of time, we have got somebody that we employ that is acting in a way that's just not consistent with our values, and I'm talking about our wider values here, they need to go.
That's very clear and very straightforward. I'm conscious we have about 10 minutes left, so we really must talk about COVID quickly before we come on to the questions. I suppose, the million-dollar question, whether the situation now is going to accelerate or hinder this need for change that we've been talking about, and what have we been seeing on the ground. Nigel, the sort of businesses you work with have obviously been having an incredibly challenging time during the last 6 months or so. How do you see it working out in your industry?
Well, I think there's two things going on. One is, I think Charles's question is the right one to ask. We saw a huge amount of commitment from our clients pre-2008, particularly on environmental stuff, and it all then paused. Not all of it, but it was a real slowdown. My sense on this particular recession is that actually such is the level of commitment and such is the level of weight and force behind it. We're in a very different position to where we were in 2007, 2008, where it had moved beyond the fringe, but it was only just beyond the fringe. It was starting to be talked about at board level, but wasn't full centre at board level. So I think we're in a different position. Clearly, some businesses will struggle to focus on it as much as they perhaps would have done, but I think that there's a real force behind it. The second thing is that actually the pandemic has accelerated it already. So if you look at, well-being of people, clearly there's a whole bunch of people whose well-being is not great at the moment because they've lost their jobs or, have lost their purpose or whatever it is. But there is a huge swathe of people whose work-life balance is suddenly a whole lot better. And they're no longer doing that commute to the office. That has helped, considerably this whole area. So I think there's those two things going on. For some people, there's been a benefit already, and for some companies a benefit already, as they realise that actually you don't need to be in the office working with that horrible commute and all the stress and anxiety around that. And secondly, I think there's a real weight behind it already. So so many commitments have been made. It's much hard to see how people can default on those.
Yeah, and people have more time to think about these issues, which I'm sure is why we've seen so much happen in this space in terms of the thinking and around movements in the last 6 months. James, how have socially responsible businesses fared in the pandemic from an investor perspective?
Broadly, extremely well. I mean, and it's difficult because as Nigel pointed out, there are some major social challenges we are going to face as we try and come out of COVID, and there will be some challenges in specifically in this country, as well as we may have lost an entire cohort of children in terms of their education. But actually, that I think is a major challenge. The good news is, from a financial investment point of view, I think this has been a bit of the jolt that is required for markets to be able to recognize, actually, what on earth am I doing holding this XYZ stock that doesn't give about its employees, or has no idea its environmental footprint, or has made absolutely no public commitment to making any change at all? Why on earth would I be putting my capital there when I can now see these other businesses who are doing the exact opposite and are future fit? So a bit like the Brexit situation, where many people got that was a surprise for many, especially in the financial markets. Any time when people are forced to ask big questions, fundamental questions, what on earth is it all for? What is the purpose of this money? What is the point of this business? I think those moments are really important pivot points. And I think we've seen one, as Giles has pointed out, I think we've seen a really important one during this COVID crisis. There is always a negative impact of these sorts of things. I think all of our job, incumbent on all of us, to make sure the positive impact from something like COVID is something that we remember long after the negative impact has affected so many lives.
Absolutely. I hope that you can still hear me, because I think my technology has failed just as I was reading a comment.
No, you're back.
I'm back. Okay, good. I was just reading a comment saying that technology has created a much more inclusive way of working during the pandemic, and I seem to be struggling with technology, so not always, but hopefully you can hear me. So just some final comments then. James, thank you. That's really interesting to think about how capital will be deployed post-COVID. But Giles, any final thoughts on where we are now and what might happen in the coming months?
I think just to say, no business has not been impacted by this, and in both good and bad ways. And I think we need to learn sort of lessons from that on both sides. And that's not meant to sound philosophical. It's just, I think, the truth that it has really shone a light on businesses' values, and how they responded to the crisis, I think, will be taken and remembered for many years to come. And I think that's helped continue to keep, as Nigel says, many of those things that people wanted to do, that they still want to try and do and achieve and keep going. My worry is I don't think that the recession has even started yet. And if I think of, a client that we had 6 months ago, Virgin Atlantic, it wants to continue to do the commitments that it has, but that's a business completely on its knees and is sort of struggling to operate on a day-to-day basis. Now, how they manage their sustainability commitments in that scenario is incredibly challenging. So I think how deep this recession goes, we'll look back and say, has that had an impact on people, the corporate's journey, sustainability journey? But I do believe that this has only opened up even more businesses' need to understand what they do and be purpose-led organizations as they go forward. And the ones that are will be more successful than the ones that aren't. Yeah,
I'm sure that's right. And Kate, I mean, I was very pleased to hear that you are as busy as ever getting inquiries, but would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. I think there's kind of a twofold thing. You've got the driver of the reality of the climate crisis that we're in, the fact that we need to change, that supply chains are being disrupted, and that the way that we operate, look at Australia, look at California. You can't fail to deny that we need to change the way that we do business. So there's huge drivers there for us to kind of keep changing. And then you've got the government regulation that's happening with that. And I also think this shift, this understanding in the importance of our people and how they are and how well they are and things like that actually this work-life balance, this understanding of different commitments of recognizing we have people, not just employees, is also creating the shift that we need as well. So the other thing I think is really important, and Giles said, people will remember how businesses behaved, and I think that's absolutely true. And ones who weren't behaving in the way that we expected them to behave were called out very quickly and very loudly by media, by people. And I think one of the interesting and the most influential roles, and although it's a controversial thing, but social media is brilliant in that sense, because it's very easy to call out a business. It's very easy to call someone to account and to build a campaign around it. So I think that will also, especially if you're making public targets, which a lot of people are, actually to be held to account and to be able to communicate what you're doing is going to be really important as well.
Yeah, really interesting. We've come to the end of our hour. If I might just ask our panelists to stay on the line for 2 more minutes to answer some of these questions that have come in. I'm grateful for the attendees to have asked a couple. So if I may just keep you on, taking the first one, can any of you see a future where local government commissioning would include some factors other than just price? Is that already happening? Anyone want to take this?
Yes,
Giles?
I can take
Yeah.
that. I'm actually on a purpose panel for the government, looking at ways that we can help government commissioning integrate purpose impact areas into that commissioning process. So that it is happening. As probably lots of people know, it's quite a challenging area. It takes time, but I think that will be coming down the line over the next year or so.
And Giles, is that looking at kind of reforming the Social Value Act that already, is it linked to that?
Well, it's starting with national government contracts and then moving to local government, and will therefore need some sort of act of parliament in order to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because I think where again, just looking at whatever sector you're in, this question of factors other than price are becoming relevant to all of us. I think. I mean, even as lawyers, when we are pitching at clients, we are always now being asked to be transparent about what we're doing in matters other than just price. And clients want to know, what are we doing around diversity? What are we doing around sustainability? So it's a relevant question, I think, cross sector. Just moving on to another question, Giles, from your experience of working in business over the past 24 years, what would you say are the biggest barriers for companies wanting to reach net zero, including a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030?
Yeah, I was literally just writing a reply to that. But I think that in many ways, I think where businesses think the barriers are not the barriers. They think it's the people who generate the energy, who sort of fly the planes. It's all outside their business that makes them, a high carbon business. But actually, it's a mindset inside the business, because there are solutions, there are ways in to be able to run any business in an increasingly net zero way. And I just I suppose it's challenging the business to think much more creatively and collaboratively outside their business to find solutions to achieve those reductions, which are eminently possible. So I think a lot of that barrier is in the minds of the people within the organization rather than outside it.
And I think that answers a question. Biggest barrier to change, to make it more sustainable. I guess that's relevant not just to carbon, but actually in any element of looking at your business and being more responsible. It is in the mindset, isn't it?
I genuinely think so. It's sort of held up that it's a different model. It's not a different model. It's about iterative changes. It's about what we do all the time in business, which is that we adapt and we change our business in order to meet the requirements and the needs of consumers. And society is just another one of those. And I think that we've got to stop sort of thinking that we've got to do, there's no different model. We just need to use the model that we've got better.
Yeah. Interesting. James, we have a couple here for you as well. I'm interested to know, from an investor point of view, would they currently have a concept of inclusive entrepreneurship on their radar, or still be looking to invest in businesses that see this as a CSR exercise? I guess that's one question. And maybe you could also take this second question. Mike Carney's warning about pension funds being invested in fossil fuels caught people's attention 8 months ago. Has it had any impact on investment practice in your view?
So the pensions is a really interesting one, because it is a much more democratic way of investing, and lots of people do have pensions, and there's some fantastic initiatives. Make My Money Matter being a great one that we're involved with, and a number of others are doing exactly that, because people often, we talk about passion. How many people are passionate about investing? Fortunately, we are at Try, but not very many other people are. But if we could get people a bit more passionate, just even if it's a passion like disgust or something, we can get that change happening in pensions, and that will be monumental when it comes to making the markets different and making change happen within the corporate world. And in terms of, yes, the point about how does any investor spot the difference between greenwashing, lip service, and fundamentally this is the business that is taking things like inclusivity to its heart. And that is, I mean, in one sense, it's easy if you can spend a lot of time with the business. In the public markets where you're buying and selling shares, it's tougher to do. But really, you've got to go back to looking at the business with some of the core concepts we talked about today, about authenticity. Is this a values-driven business? Does this understand the concept of transparency? What we haven't talked about at all is humility. Like, how many banks are good at going, we got that wrong. No, I think banks are rubbish at that. But if we could find these traits, which actually, it turns out the traits we're talking about are the kind of people you'd like to meet, the kind of friends we have, the kind of people we aspire to be. And if we can start to think about how is that business like a person I'd like to spend time with, maybe that's a good way of thinking about it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for staying on the extra 5 minutes as well to answer those questions. I'm so grateful to my panelists. I'm really sad that we've lost Nigel, but I extend my thanks, of course, to Nigel, Kate and Giles and James. I think we had a really helpful set of takeaways here. I think one of the first things is look at your business, do some diligence on yourself, maybe look at the go to the B Corp's website and you'll be able to look at their criteria, and then set some values for yourself that are going to be, and some goals for yourself that are measurable. Let's be authentic about them. Let's be transparent about them so that you could be held to account. But really, you know, this is a long journey, so not something you can fix overnight, but really to get the buy-in, it is going to take time. So bring your people along with you. Thank you so much, everybody. Delighted to have been with you all on this session. And thank you again to my panelists.